There are many commercial console and handheld failures that were released on the market. And in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you 10 of my favorite commercial failures of consoles and handhelds that I still like to play. And your list may be different. I'm going to have a link below to the Wikipedia listing of what they consider commercial failures. Everybody has their own definition. I'm just going to use this article as a reference. And so I've enjoyed playing many different handhelds and consoles and computers over the years, and the ones that I've gotten my hands on and gotten to experience I really have appreciated. And so today's list is an eclectic combination of many things I've experienced over the years. I'm going to be giving the reasons why as I go. It's not in any particular order. This is just the 10 I think of when I love playing and collecting these. Now, some of these are very difficult to get. The good news is that emulation has made many of the games available on these consoles and handhelds available. And so if you don't have access to original hardware, that's a good second option. All right, first up is the 3DO. You know, the 3DO really was a pioneer of current gaming. You know, it was a disc-based system at a time in which there was very few of those on the market. It was super expensive. That's part of why it failed. It only had one console port on the actual unit, and each controller had to be daisy-chained. But when it comes down to it, there is a lot of fun games of that early, 3D gaming on the 3DO. There are some stinkers as well. I'm definitely going to be covering those in the future. But if you can sift through some of the garbage, there is some amazing games. I actually did a couple videos on the 3DO. I talked about my 3DO collection as well as some underrated games, and I may want to check those out. But I really do enjoy the 3DO and what it had to offer. I enjoy collecting for it, and I think it's well worth going back and revisiting, especially if you're into like Xbox, PlayStation games. You can see where some of those games came from. All right, the next one gets a lot of flack, and that's the Atari 5200. Now, it was a huge console failure. It was a follow-up to the original 2600. Eventually became backwards compatible with an adapter, but when it first came out, it wasn't. And, a lot of people were frustrated with those controllers, which broke easily. And there are many ways of getting a workaround for that. First of all, essentially it's a repackaged 8-bit computer, but through emulation you can enjoy many of the games. And the cool thing about Atari 5200 is that a lot of the games had better graphics than the 2600 counterparts. They look closer to the arcade versions of several of the Atari classics. The Atari Vault 2 includes some of these classics on it, as well as some other collections that Atari did on the Flashback series, available for Switch and Xbox and PlayStation. And so if you want to experience Atari 5200 gaming, that's awesome, as well as some homebrew support. There are games still being made for this console, and it's pretty cool to see that as well. I love collecting for the Atari 5200, and I had a few exclusives released on it, especially with a dual analog stick controller, and that's kind of fun to check those out. Space Dungeon comes to mind. The next one is an oddity. Whenever I show people, they look at this console computer hybrid and ask, what is that? Yes, Bali Astricate. It's had a couple different names as it changed hands over the years. The Bali Home Library Computer, Bali Computer. Anyways, the Fitness Bali, same company, made a console computer hybrid in the 70s. And it's a wonderful, unique, trapezoid looking console. It had a tray on it. You could put the games in it, and it had an actual game holder built in where you could store the games. The games looked like cassette tapes, but they weren't tapes at all. They were cartridges. I've really enjoyed, over the years, Dog Patch, Artillery War, Incredible Wizard, which is Wizard of War. Had some awesome arcade ports. At the time, it was technically superior. It was prone to breaking down, overheating, and finding one working now is a little bit harder. The most unique thing about this console is the controller though. It's a cross between like a gun handle and a toothpaste cap. It has a built-in paddle feature, really unique, and I enjoy it quite a bit. And so it's got a few homebrews on it as well, and so it's fun to check out. You can play it in emulation as well. Next up is the Sega Dreamcast. I've talked about the Dreamcast quite a bit on my channel, and I will continue to talk about the Sega Dreamcast. I worked at a Software Etc. during the launch of the Sega Dreamcast, and it continues to get aftermarket support. There's many games that have been ported to it. It's really nice to see that. What I like about the Sega Dreamcast is just what I said, is the continued community support. A lot of these consoles on here do have strong community support in which people are still making games, and that's what makes them kind of fun to go back and play. The Sega Dreamcast is no different. While the controller wasn't the best, the Sega Dreamcast is near and dear to my heart. You know, unfortunately, its time on the market was limited, but I think it had a lasting impact, and I think a lot of Sega fans out there really appreciate this console. I know I do, and love its game library. This next console is met with a lot of ridicule, but it does have a strong aftermarket support, and that's the Atari Jaguar. What I like about the Jaguar is that it really does have awesome aftermarket support. Its original library wasn't that great. There was some good games. I did a video talking about its games that were good. I also did a video talking about some of its bad video games, but I think enthusiasts out there have really done a good job at adding to its library. They're still making game cartridges and sold on Atari Age, which is awesome. There's other sites too that sell aftermarket games. And you know, while the controller wasn't the best, there is a 6-button controller update that you can get for it. It is super expensive though, but if you can experience the Atari Jaguar, I do recommend checking out some of its better games. Tempest 2000 comes to mind, one of my favorites. Atari Aliens vs. Predator. The list goes on. As well as many Atari ST ports are now available to play on the Atari Jaguar, and I think that adds to its library, as the Atari ST library was pretty robust, and so some of those classics now you can play. Love that. Now let's talk about the Atari Lynx now. The Atari Lynx was a very advanced color handheld, first color handheld to come out. And you know, its library again was rather limited. It sucked through batteries, but there's been some aftermarket support of this. Homebrew games coming out. Songbird Productions, I've done a couple videos about some of the homebrew games on the Atari Lynx, but I actually like the arcade ports that were on this handheld. Another handheld that is fine to play in emulation, and you know, Rygar and Road Blasters come to mind. I really enjoyed its library, and it was super advanced. And so, you know, I had this back in the day, saved up my own money to purchase one. Definitely worth checking out if you can track one down. If not, that's why you have emulation. Another failed handheld is the NeoGeo Pocket Color. I actually worked at Software Etc. when this was sneezed out. It competed, I do believe, with the Game Boy Color and failed miserably, but it carried on that quality of NeoGeo games to pocket-sized versions of many of them, including new ones. A few that come to mind, Metal Slug First Mission, as well as Samurai Showdown 2. I'm a huge fan of those series, and as well as many, many others. It had a very small library, you know, and it just really struggled against the might of Nintendo of the time. But what's kind of cool is there's recently a kind of a compilation of some of the best NeoGeo Pocket Color games, and that was released on Switch, even on physical by Limited Run Games. And so it's nice to see that. Another handheld that you can play in emulation. The next is actually a micro console, and one I've talked about on my channel, and that's the Ouya. Now, the Ouya was met with a lot of ridicule, but actually looking back and seeing what it was trying to offer, the Ouya actually had a good idea, just was poorly executed. I think mostly because its controller was just so-so. It was a very average controller. It was a successful Kickstarter. I've talked about the ET effect, where a lot of people make fun of something before experiencing it themselves. The Ouya was an Android-based micro console, And what I like about it is it's easy to use emulators that were on its market. Now the market has since gone bye-bye, but community support has resurrected it. There is online instructions on how to get your Ouya and its store back up. It's pretty cool that you have access to those still, but I really like it and use it on my channel really to show aftermarket homebrew sometimes. It's so easy to play, especially with using its built-in, on the market back in the day that we had several emulators. And so it still runs those rather well for being an older Android micro console. I still love it. Towerfall was its biggest game that was released on it, and I'm a huge fan of Towerfall and got to play it quite a bit on the Ouya before I played it on anything else. And so it makes my list because I still enjoy playing it. Next up is actually kind of centered around the US market, and that's the Sega Saturn. While internationally, I think the Sega Saturn was more successful. Here in the States, it got crushed by its competition, and it just wasn't ever able to shake some of the mistakes that Sega did with its marketing as time continued. But the Sega Saturn did offer some amazing games. It was the true successor of the Sega Genesis. Imports are amazing on it, shooters and fighters, as well as some RPGs, as well as many other games. You know, I've come to really appreciate what the Sega Saturn has to offer and like to continue to play its vast game library. There's been some continued support for this gem of Sega consoles, and I really like seeing that. I think it definitely is overlooked when it comes to Sega collecting, and it's nice to see that there's fans out there that still love and appreciate this console. Next up is the Vectrex, and it's the only vector-based console ever to be made. And what's crazy, it was relatively short on the market, less than a year. And you know, typically when a console only lasts that long on the market, it just fades away. But because of the uniqueness of this console, the aftermarket support continues. Well into this day, there's still being aftermarket games created for it. I really love seeing that. I really appreciated playing the Vectrex and some of its timeless classics. I've gotten into playing Spike, as well as even the built-in game Mindstorm. But you know, there's so many other countless games, a lot of great arcade ports as well that typically look very unique to the Vectrex. And so that's just my short list of 10 console failures that I still like to play and revisit. What are yours? The list is below to the Wikipedia article that shows what they consider all console failures. There are others, but I just use that list as a reference. So I'd like to hear your top 10 list for console failures that you like or maybe have experienced or emulated. And I want to thank everybody for the ongoing support. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and click the bell as I'm uploading videos every week. You folks are wonderful and beautiful. This is the Immortal Johnny Hancock, and you have a good day.